Hey there, folks, and good evening. Tonight, we are here for a special event with one of our presenters, Christopher Balzano. And today we're going to be talking Florida cryptids and learning about the history of them and the great stories behind all the creatures. Today we are here, as I said, with Christopher Balzano. Christopher is a teacher, author, folklorist, and podcaster behind the podcast Tripping on Legends. His newest book, Haunted Ocala National Forest, was released this June and is available on Amazon. I'm going to be sharing the link here. Throughout the presentation, if you do have any questions for Christopher, please post those in the chat because we will be checking them out and looking for all your questions, and hopefully we'll have some answers throughout the event. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Christopher Balzano. Christopher, how are you doing today?
Excellent. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for coming today, and we're happy to have you back. It's been a while.
It's really good to be back here. I was like, it was funny. I was trying to figure out how do I do my presentation on StreamYard again? So it's as a teacher, having lived my life for like 2 years on Zoom, it's interesting to be back here. So
yeah, they changed up the interface, but it's still the same old stuff. We're chatting online just like it used to be, but yeah, we really appreciate you coming out and presenting online with us. Last time we saw you, you were in person at a couple branches. But yeah, we're happy to have you back here online and live on YouTube. But thanks for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. And as for the questions, as I'm presenting, I am used to interruptions being a high school teacher. So feel free to, you don't even have to raise your hand, but you can put them definitely in the comments. If it's something maybe relevant and I catch it at the time, I will totally address it. And if not, then I will kind of go through some of the questions at the end. And I guess I'm asking for a little bit of participation as we go on, because one part of tonight's presentation is part of a debate. And I think that it's interesting to debate what exactly is a cryptid and what falls into the realm and the discussion of cryptid. So let's start with a definition. I see Johnny's already said he just found out what a cryptid means. And so the easiest definition we can give, to some degree, it's once again, me as an English teacher kind of being like, well, let's look at it, break it down into its Latin and Greek roots. And but a cryptid and cryptozoology is kind of where it comes from. Cryptid, if you try to type it into anything, it's going to come up as a misspelling. It's not a recognized word in most things, but it does come from the word cryptozoology, which is the study of animals that are hidden. And so when we think of animals that are hidden, it's not necessarily, it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's not necessarily what we're looking for. It's not, any animal that's hard to find or something like that. Instead, it's animals, and it's been adopted different ways, but animals that could potentially be natural, but they're not seen enough, they're not well documented enough, they're not cataloged, they're not recognized by mainstream biologists as being something that has merit, or that it can be tracked, it can be classified, it can be qualified, it can be chopped up. And so, it's really the study of those animals who have, or those beasts is probably even a better word for it, that have 1 foot in our imagination and 1 foot in reality. And it's interesting. Now, if you know me, I'm a ghost guy. I'm a ghostly legends guy, even on top of that. Am I the best person to talk about cryptids? Well, I've had a ton of experience in this, because one thing that you can always say, is almost always true. There are certain parts of cryptids, there are certain species of cryptids who always go hand in hand with the supernatural. They seem to be in the same place. And I'll give you several examples. The first example is where I started, in Massachusetts. There's this place called the Bridgewater Triangle. The Bridgewater Triangle has a ton of ghostly stories. It has a ton of unexplained occurrences that happened. If you guys know Lizzie Borden is part of the Bridgewater Triangle. But in addition to that, it has an unusual amount, compared to anywhere else in New England, of Bigfoot sightings, and of pterodactyl sightings, and of Thunderbird sightings. And if you track all throughout the country and beyond, these places that have a high concentration of cryptid sightings, some of the ones we're going to talk about tonight, some of the ones, they also seem to have more UFO sightings. They also seem to have more ghostly sightings. Weird things seem to follow it. We can say that maybe that has something to do with the nature of where these things are seen, right? You don't see a skinwalker walking down the streets of Miami, right? You just don't see it. So these isolated areas where we're going to be hearing about tonight, and the Ocala, which is what my book is about, is a great local example. It makes for misidentification. It makes for places where you may go where people don't go there very often. It's not very well settled. It's wild, which is why, as we go through some of these stories, some of these places are not like that. And when they're not like that, that's when you really have to take the sighting and you have to take the report as, wait a minute, this is kind of crazy. This isn't some way off in the distance place. This is some place where people regularly go and it's seen. The other interesting thing about the difference between cryptids and my specialty, which would be, ghosts and the paranormal, is that ghosts and the paranormal are built on backstory, right? We have a ghost haunt. We have, a potential haunting. We have a potential, something weird going on, as people always say, something bump in the night, we immediately jump to what's the backstory of it. What is why is this haunting happening? And that's where I make my living, right? I make my living talking about the backstory, and oftentimes the backstory is more interesting than the actual ghost. In the world of cryptids, it's not built on backstory as much. How do you give a backstory for a lizard man, right? Like, are you talking about his home life? Instead, cryptids and their lore and their study are really ground in sightings. Some of these sightings are historic. Everyone knows the Patterson tape, right? Some of them are known to locals. It's a mythology, and it's an understanding, and it's a belief in Bigfoot, in Skunk Ape, in like someone was saying, Loch Ness Monster, that's based on years or repetition of sightings, or sightings that catch the attention in the news, therefore they catch our imagination. And so the stories are kept alive because if I can see it and you can see it, unlike a ghost, it's tangible, which is part of the reason why, especially here in Florida, expeditions to go look for cryptids are big business, and people take it very seriously. I recently spoke at a conference. I just scheduled myself today for another Bigfoot conference, and I was speaking at this, and it was amazing to me how repetitious the stories were. But the audience was enthralled, and everyone was very, very serious. You can go out and you can look for a ghost, and you can search for EVPs, and you can analyze whether something that you hear on a tape are they saying something. But when you can actually go out and you can cast a footprint in the mud, or you can spend your time studying hair samples, it makes it extremely real. And therefore, for those that are able to look at that evidence and say it's good, right, or it's intriguing, it becomes very real. And so one of the first ones that I really want to talk about tonight is something that is kind of based on that. We live in Florida. The amount of surface area or the amount of seacoast that we have is ridiculous, right? Meaning we have, especially in the early settling days, Native American reports from the Seminoles, but also from the Timucua, from the Topobogan, from the Calusa, these reports of monsters in the sea. Now, science might say that this is something easy, that this is not cryptid at all, that it's just they didn't know what they were looking at. but these reports are varied enough that and exaggerated enough that it makes us take notice, right? I was reading a great book, and I really have to recommend this to you guys. This is called Sun, Sand, and Sea Serpents. And maybe I can later on put the thing in it by David Guzwald, who is a genius. And I just want you guys to look at how thick this is and how little the writing is. These are the number of reports of sea serpents that have been seen in Florida. And they all kind of take on a very similar tone in that there's something, it's large, it looks, these people who are seeing this are generally fishermen, right? Like they know what they're seeing, they know what they're looking at, and yet there seems to be something being baffled about it. Like it's the oddity thing. And one of the ones that keeps coming up, partly because it's seen inland, would be Pinky. And Pinky is also known as Johnny. It's also known as the St. John's Monster. It would seem to be a representation of all the things that people are seeing in the ocean, only they're seeing it inland. This is a monster or a sea serpent, much like Nessie, much like Champ that are seen. It's seen in Astor Park. It's seen in Lake Monroe. These are all near Jacksonville. But then it's actually seen as far down as Astor. And actually, Astor is where the first real report comes of it, because there was in 1774, a guy by the name of William Bartram is exploring all of these different parts of inland on the St. John's. And Astor is a pretty crazy place to begin with. You can just read my books if you want to figure that out in terms of ghosts. And he is getting these constant reports of a monster, of a sea monster, which is kind of flows its way down the St. John's. And the report is kind of published in his official documentation of things. And then the description keeps coming up years later. And it's this kind of, some people have described it as a dinosaur. Some people have described it as looking like a dragon even. Obviously, the early reports before we know what dinosaurs are comparing it to dragons. It's said to swim like a fish and yet walk like a dog. So the weird thing about this in terms of like some of the sea serpents is that Pinky comes on the land. There are reports of Pinky actually eating the vegetation on the edges of Astor Park and Lake Monroe and then jumping back into the water. It's really weird that a lot of the reports don't mention how big the body is, but all of them seem to talk about how big the neck is. That it's a 3-foot long elongated neck, like we would consider like physically looking like a brontosaurus or something like that. He has a flat head. Many of the reports include that he has 2 horns, and the horns almost look like seashells on the top of his head. If you can see the black and white photo, the one that's much more professionally drawn and not the one that was actually sketched by someone as they were witnessing it. Oftentimes it's reported as having gills, and that's kind of important for some of the other stuff, but it's reported as having these flaps of skin which seem to be gills on the sides of its neck that kind of move in and out. Dark slanted eyes, a mouth that seems to kind of like go down, almost like in a weird frown. And it's once again built on all of these kind of famous sightings of it. The weird thing is that we're not just talking about long, long ago. From 1955 to 1961 seems to be the largest flap of these Pinky sightings in Central Florida, kind of from Jacksonville to Central Florida. Especially when you consider that, like leading into this, the reports were beginning to increase. In 1953, the Orlando Sentinel, always a trustworthy source of information, actually offered a $5,000 reward for anyone who could capture physical evidence of it, or even get a picture of it or something of it. Probably the 2 biggest sightings are in 1975, a woman by the name of Dorothy Abrams. She's out. She's part of this kind of large collection of people. She's the one that gives us kind of the best description. And then Mary Lou Richardson in the 1960s. She's out hunting with her dad, and they all see it, and they report it, and it's got this pink kind of color to it. And the interesting thing is that they're reporting this, and people are kind of like, are they crazy? But then there was 6 other independent ones that kind of led to it. So it's unexplained. It's still seen to this day. Every once in a while, there'll be a random pinky sighting, and if it ever happens, it gets reported, by everybody. Now, over the years, people have kind of said what they think it might be. The most popular explanation is that it's an albino manatee. I don't know much about biology. I don't know much about our faithful sea cow, but unless they're grounded, unless they're beached, manatees really don't come out of the water. They also, I don't know how you would be able to confuse a 3-foot long neck, thin neck, with anything having to do with a manatee, which has nothing that's thin, right? But also the albino aspect of it. Okay, so white can be mistaken for pink, and yet these are reported over a long course of years. So it would have to be consistently either the same manatee lasting, getting a really old age, or it would have to be the repetition of an albino manatee. And then the second most popular one is that it's a salamander. Now, the salamander one is interesting because there are species of salamander in Asia that reach 6, 7, 8 feet long. And so there is that aspect to it. But once again, the gills. Salamanders, these kind of salamanders especially, will take on the color of whatever they eat, much like flamingos. And so if they're eating shrimp, they might turn that pink color, but no one's ever been able to prove it. So it just becomes one of those things where and this happens a lot in the cryptids throughout Florida. It just kind of becomes a mascot for the area, right? Much like you can go to Scotland and you can do all this Nessie-related stuff. You can go to Lake Monroe and you can go to Astor Park and you can find restaurants that are named after it, and you can find you can take your picture with fake pinkies. But it's one of those ones that keeps going. And I think part of the reason why we like it so much is that, unlike what we think of a lot of these cryptids, it doesn't seem monstrous. There are no reports of pinky destroying boats. And so it's kind of like this cute, safe, weird thing that we can't explain. Some people might not say the same for skunk ape. And you cannot talk about cryptids in Florida without talking about skunk ape. It is by far, I often say Robert the Doll is the superstar of the ghost world in Florida. There's no mistaking that skunk ape is the most popular, most well-known, most documented, most followed, most passionate about cryptid in the state. And if you have any doubt in your mind about that, here's a challenge for you. If you guys are into TikTok, here's your TikTok challenge for the week. Go up to someone who's passionate about it, or who goes on skunk ape expeditions, or who spends a lot of time with this, and call it Bigfoot, and see what happens to you. Because in Bigfoot, it's called skunk ape. And it's interesting. I say to my students all the time, all literature is a representation of the life and times during which it's written. All Florida legends are representations of Florida, right? We can't just have Bigfoot. We can't have Sasquatch, right? We can't have the general ones. We have to have skunk ape, but we also have really good reasons for why it's called skunk ape. Part of the reason why is that it lives in swamps, right? So a lot of the areas, a lot of these you hear of, the Massachusetts, like I talked about, or you hear about the ones in Oregon and Washington State. The other great, and obviously Canada and then other parts of the world, these are forested areas. And we're going to talk about some forest skunk apes as well. But even within those forests here in Florida, they're swamps, right? And a swamp is a lot more smelly than a jungle. I mean, or not necessarily a jungle, but than a forest. But the other thing that people often cite as to why skunk ape smells so much, and it's not only 100% Florida, but it's also really it explains a lot of things that we don't know about Bigfoot, or that we debate about Bigfoot. Skunk ape actually is able to hide in the dens of alligators, right? And so because it spends its time in these swampy areas where alligators also are. Now, why the alligators aren't eating them, I don't have any idea, or attacking them, I have no idea. But they get exposed to a lot of methane gas. They get exposed to a lot of waste, and therefore they smell. They smell worse than your typical Bigfoot or your typical Yeti. And that's why they are called skunk ape, right? Because they smell just so bad based on where they live and their proximity to the waste and gas of crocodiles mixed with the swamp gas. This explains a huge thing about the debate against why Bigfoot's not real. One of the reasons people say Bigfoot is not real is like, well, then why can't we find it? Or how are they able to hide in an area that we can pretty much look into? There's your thing right there. They can actually hide in the dens of these alligators, in which case they're never going to be found, or you're not going to find them. Skunk ape, pretty much physically, other than its smell, is a Bigfoot, right? At least 7 feet tall, sometimes larger than that, sometimes slightly smaller, between 350 to 500 pounds. It has that classic walk that you've seen on the Patterson tape and you've seen other things. They're sometimes black and brown, but it also seems that here in Florida, that they seem to have a more yellowish brown coat than the classic brown bear one, right? And that's important because that distinguishes it from bears. One of my favorite words is bipedal, right? Or bipedal, which means that it walks on 2 feet. It's a fancy way of saying walks like a human. And so because it has that added element to it, people can kind of distinguish it sometimes from gorillas or large apes who don't necessarily spend the majority of their time walking like that. Doesn't mean they don't spend their time like that. You know, one of the interesting things, and this fits into the kind of 3 different places, is we have a lot of escaped animals, right? But let's talk first about the swampy one. So there's 3 major areas of cryptid, of skunk apes, one that I want to talk about. And the first one is the swampy one, which obviously takes place in the Everglades. The Everglades have probably had more reports than anywhere else, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the people who are experiencing it are just more vocal. One of them is Dave Shealy. Dave Shealy is known as the Skunk Ape guy. I was actually able to meet him a few months ago. He's very, very emotional. He experienced a skunk ape when he was really young, and it kind of left that permanent mark, and he's been searching for them ever since. And he has reported that he's found some. He's led expeditions, but he runs the Skunk Ape Research Headquarters in Okapi, Florida, which is basically like Everglades City. And it's a business for him, right? People are obsessed with it because there are so many reports from there. The one thing probably that distinguishes the swampy skunk apes, the Everglades skunk apes from the other ones, is that they tend to, once again, smell so much more. But I think part of the other thing that distinguishes them is that they seem to also be more passive. From everything that I've heard, there are like the outlier reports of ones that have attacked or ones that have felt threatened, and so they've done something or they've acted aggressively. The ones in the Everglades seem to be more kind of in balance with things. Now, I don't know whether that's we've just been in the Everglades more than we've been in some of the forested areas of Florida longer, whether there is some kind of balance that's struck with nature. But a lot of the sightings that happen in the Everglades seem to take on a more peaceful tone. It's much more, and because of that, much more detached. People see the skunk ape rather than interacting with him the way they do other places. The second place is one of my most favorite and yet most freaked out parts of the world, not just of Florida, which would be the Ocala. Like Josh said, my new book is called Haunted Ocala, right? I mean, it's a book that only covers a third of the reports that I got of ghostly activity and ghost stories and weird stories in the Ocala. And what I don't have in there are the innumerable amount of skunk ape sightings that are seen as well. So once again, we have this area that has a high concentration of UFOs, of paranormal stuff, of weird energy, things like that. One of the things that, once again, differentiates it from the Everglades is also, depending on how freaky you are, depending on how open-minded you are, the Ocala seems to have what's known as portals. And so there seems to be different places in the Ocala where the geography of the forest itself shifts. People go out, and I'll talk about just a cemetery. People go out to a cemetery that they know in the woods. They've walked these woods their whole life. It's there on a Tuesday. They go on Friday, the same cemetery, same location. They've GPSed it. They've marked it down. Hunters have marked it down. They go and it's not there the next day, right? And then they go 2 days later and it's there again. This might account for why, even though we've invaded the Ocala now to some degree, the reports keep coming in, and they seem to be able to appear and disappear at will. We're not talking the Pacific Northwest here. The Ocala is 600 square feet. It's not. It's not the forests and the expanse of Canada. It's a large area, but for the number of reports that are reported there, for the number of the people that are seeing it there, it's hard to account for why there would be so many of them. There are a lot of kind of things that are around there that are mistaken for it, right? They're kind of like bunched in with it. You know, we have something in the Ocala also called the Mossman, M-O-S-S, not Mothman, like my good friend over here, but Mossman, who is seen in different parts of the Ocala as well. He's seen in parts of the Green Swamp. He seems to be a Bigfoot that's covered in green, like in green moss, rather than like the reddish brown like I was talking about. We have the Borden Bogger, who's also seen around there, who's slightly shorter but seems to hold a lantern, which is a classic case. Both of these cases you can kind of read more about if you get. Now I'm not doing my own books, but these are two great books by Mark Muncy. One is called Erie, Florida, and one is called Freaky, Florida. He has another book also about Florida, which I'm blacking on the name of, and of course then some other books. And he does a really good job of giving the context of one of these, and he documents one of the most famous areas of the Ocala with skunk ape sightings, which would be Kerr City. There are every week I think I get an email from somebody telling me or asking me why I didn't cover Kerr City in my Haunted Ocala book, because it's so ridiculously famous. And it was almost like there was so much to do with it. I couldn't get my hands on it enough to publish it. Once again, where you have ghosts, where you have UFOs, you have Skunk Ape. Kerr City has kind of this weird history to it. It was, kind of first discovered, or first kind of like people started surveying it in 1834. And then it was like officially a town in 1884. So it took like 50 years for it to officially become incorporated. And it had this boom in the 1860s where it was like, there was a train going through, so it was becoming popular. And so, it had a hotel. And so it kind of, like a lot of towns in that area, became a boom town. And so there was a lot of business going on. But then, the town was pretty much abandoned by the early 1900s. And then you could still go out there, you could still rent places, but it was nowhere near as active. One of the weird things that happened was that there was the Kerr House Hotel, and it was pretty much abandoned. Like after the boom, it was abandoned. And this religious community, not the Rainbow people, another religious community moved into this hotel. They kind of took it over. They began squatting in it, and the preacher was very popular, and so his followers came down here. They came down and they were staying in this hotel. They were so frequently attacked by these large hairy animals who would bang on the windows, who would throw things at the house, who would make noise at night, that they actually thought that it was being taken over by the devil. The preacher deemed that the devil himself had sent these hairy men down to Florida to destroy them. And so they thought the only thing that they could do was burn the house down. And so they burnt the hotel to the ground. They left and they went somewhere else. But that site especially continues to get skunk ape sightings. And all of these different places, there was only one a few years ago where these people in Kerr City, they were staying in Kerr City. It was continuing to be rented out kind of privately, and their car alarm was going off. And, they were kind of hesitant and they were kind of lazy getting out there. And when they got out there, they found a skunk ape, this 7-foot tall, red hairy monster throwing rocks at the car, trying to get the alarm to stop. I think one of the reasons that there are so many in Central Florida, and when I talk about Central Florida, I know you guys, especially if you're here, you're talking about Central Florida this way. I always say Central Florida to me is this way. It's when you get off of the coast. And I think a lot of these ghost towns and a lot of these towns that had their boom and then they just kind of moved on and nature has taken them over again, that's where you seem to have a lot of these skunk ape sightings. And of course, the Ocala is famous for that. And then we get to, oddly enough, the most famous picture of skunk ape. So I'm going to allow you guys afterwards to go and search these ones out. But that would be in Mayaca River State Park. Mayaca River State Park is in Sarasota, Florida. This is what you're seeing. The big picture that you're seeing here is the most famous picture taken of skunk ape. So if you know Sarasota and you know where it is, it's on, it's central West Coast Florida. I guess I think of it as central because it's halfway between where I live and where you guys are in Orlando. But it is notorious for this picture, for this skunk ape picture, which was, originally taken in 2000. Now, the story behind this is that the police actually got 2 pictures. There was no name attached to it. There was no identification originally. It was just these 2 pictures. And the story was that these people who had sent it were doing it on behalf of an old woman who refused to be identified, who took this picture while she was camping at Mayaca River State Park. The skunk ape itself, she had no idea what it was. She had no idea what a skunk ape was actually eating apples in the area. And she snapped the picture, she startled it, and it went off. And she actually reported it to, this is via the story, reported it because she thought it was an escaped orangutan. So if you know anything, once again, about Sarasota, we're talking Sarasota is the middle of like Ringling country, right? Like, I don't know why it's not called Ringling County. So you have obviously Sarasota, and that's where they would winter, that and Venice, and then you have all the towns around, or where many of the people who worked for Ringling would winter, and then where they stayed afterwards. In addition to that, that's where a lot of the animals were originally brought in before they were brought across the coast. The picture that you're seeing is right here, this guy right here. So if you look the opposite of me, you can kind of see it here in the woods. And if you want, Johnny, I can send you the picture, or you could just Google Sarasota skunk ape and you can see it for yourself. It's kind of hiding here, in the palms. So she thought it was an orangutan, right? So once again, we have that identification of like maybe there is something a natural cause, but because it's not in the right setting. Trust me, I worked at Naples High School, and at Naples High School, you know not to talk to the monkeys because there are monkeys that escaped from Charlie. So we do obviously have a history of this, but this picture does have. Josh, are they not able to see the picture? I've got a few people saying that they can't see it.
You saying the picture on the PowerPoint?
Yeah, the picture on the PowerPoint. Are people not able to see the PowerPoint?
It is there, yeah. I just we were just looking, I think, for it in there, but it's just right.
Oh, okay.
Picture next
so
to the palm.
Can you see my pointer in there or no?
We cannot see the pointer. No.
Okay, so if you go opposite me, like there's a little picture there, there's a big picture. Just follow the edge of the top of the big picture, and you see the shoulder.
Yeah, it's the
big picture, not the little picture.
It's like the background. Here, I'll also send a link to a picture I found on
beautiful.
On
okay.
Google Images.
The little one, the little picture, is my own story, which I'm going to get to in a moment. But this, because it's become so popular, and it's like, one that was taken that is at least out there. Some people said it was a photoshopped or an early version of Photoshop of an orangutan. Some people say it was an orangutan. And yet in 2013, a guy by the name of Michael Falconer actually was able to catch video, which is also probably the most famous video that we have of Skunk Ape as well, the same location. And you can actually go to YouTube and find his video. When I went to Mayaca, and I've been to Mayaca probably 4 or 5 times now. When I went there my second time, I was tracking down several ghostly legends that were there, and not really overly concerned with Skunk Ape. Although it's really interesting that the Rangers wanted to talk Skunk Ape with me a lot. And I'm like, all right, I'm doing Skunk Ape a different day. Right now I'm looking for the headless guy in Big Flats. And so they actually, we were driving around, and we got there and we saw these gigantic cages. So the cage is what is in this picture, although I can see, you can't really overly see it, but it was there, and it's a little bit into one of the swampy areas of Mayaca. Of course, it's just a boar cage, right? It's just a cage used to catch some of the wild boar in there. If you've ever been to Mayaca, it's absolutely beautiful. It seems to be a collector's place for alligators. So sometimes you're just hanging out someplace and an alligator walks right by you. It's kind of freaky. We went there looking for these ghosts, but we saw these cages. We knew about the Skunk Ape. And so we decided to bang trees. So one of the things about Skunk Ape is they like to communicate. I've heard the same exact thing, or we were able to do the same exact thing in Ormond Beach on the other coast. Go to a tree, bang on the tree with a stick, and you'll get a response, right? Skunk Ape, they hear that. It's like catnip for them. They want to communicate to you. We banged on the tree, and then we kind of were going back to the car, and we heard what sounded like someone banging on the cage 3 times. My daughter's very big into the number 3, so she was banging 3 times because it sounded like metal on metal. Now, the weird thing was this. We then spent another 2 hours in Mayaca, which is fairly big. It's not huge. But we were going all around park to all these different places, some of them separated by water. And everywhere we went, we would hear those 3 clangs, as if Skunk Ape was still trying to communicate with us, as if he was still trying to say something to us. We would go to where the alligators were over here, like right on the water, and we would hear the clanging. Always 3, cling, cling, cling. We'd go someplace else, cling, cling, cling. The added weird thing about this is that we were only able to get like one clear sound on tape as we were taping things, and we didn't even get it clear. But we are talking, and I say, my daughter says something weird, and my partner that I'm with says, "Oh, it just clanged. Did you get it on tape?" And when I tried to isolate it to play it, the entire tape just gets warbled at that point. So it's literally like my daughter talking, then and then this stuff, right? So it seems, whether it's mystical, whether it's something paranormal or supernatural, or that shift I was talking about, this Skunk Ape was able to travel great distances, or like some of the people who I spoke to about this, who are much more professional Skunk Ape investigators, there were multiple Skunk Apes tracking us that day, and they were communicating with each other that we were on our way, which is even scarier to think that they were stalking us as we were, stalking ghosts. So this is a Pukwudgie. So I am going to do my little Pukwudgie spiel, and it's setting something up. Years ago, when I was working on my book, Dark Woods, and this was about a place in Massachusetts, the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts, I was getting multiple reports of people who were seeing this small ogre-type creature in the woods in Massachusetts. And they all described it the same way. It was a typical, physically, it looked like a lot of cultures have, like a lot of different sightings have this, hairy creature, small, like a troll. You'd see the skin, but it also had a lot of hair, had an elongated nose. And all the sightings pretty much followed the same pattern, which was they would see this, and then it would disappear. Like they would get distracted, they would look back, and it would be gone, and they would see it in the woods. And then a few days later, and most of them said 3, but I think that was like folklore playing with their head. These creatures would come back to them. And it was always on a personal level. So one person woke up and the Pukwudgie was in their room staring down at them. Another one woke up and the Pukwudgie was looking at them through their bedroom window on the 2nd floor. So it was just literally hovering right there at the window, very much like Salem's Lot, if you've ever seen that. And then the third person was one of. I'm sorry, I was responding to the Faye Foe response, Deborah, because I think you nailed it on the, and that's what we're going to talk about in a sec. The third one, the person saw it in their rearview mirror when they were parked in a parking lot in the Freetown State Forest. All 3 of them explained it to me as if they got the feeling that they had intruded and that if they went back to the forest, the Pukwudgies would come get them, right? That like, you might know where I am, but I definitely know where you live, so don't come back to the forest. And so they were asking me, because I was kind of specialized in that area, what these were, and I had no idea. Until I discovered this concept of the Pukwudgies. And this is old Wampanoag folklore. And I spent the next 20 years of my life publishing about it. I was one of the first people to publish about them in depth, to the point that they actually called me the Pukwudgie guy. And one of the things that's come out of this, because these are real sightings that not only exist in folklore, but they can transform into different things. This is where the Fae part comes in, right? They can transform into different things. They can shapeshift. They can disappear completely. They have what seems like control of magic. They seem to be able to move great distances. They are considered, on one part of them, as very much like a trickster spirit. So once again, we're talking kind of like we think of fairies, like we think of leprechauns. But they also go through periods, especially right when the settlers first get to America, where they become vicious. They start burning villages. They start kidnapping kids. They run all kinds of havoc on people. And they also control the spirits of the people they've killed with these ghost lights they call Taipaiwankas. It's fascinating stuff. If Josh ever wanted me to, I could come on and do 2 hours just on Pukwudgies and Pukwudgie lore. And there have been some people, Daytona Beach gave me a sighting that was very much similar to a Pukwudgie sighting. Here in Cape Coral, where I am, I was asked to follow up on one. And then the person backed down. They didn't want to talk to me. So they're part of every culture. They're in different areas. They're just Pukwudgies. The name has caught on because I think Pukwudgies is a cool name. The debate rages, though. Are they supernatural? Are they paranormal? Are they elemental? Or are they cryptid? Right? So would they fall into, if you look at something, there seems to be enough of them. They seem to be part of the natural world. You can touch a Pukwudgie can touch you. Where would you classify this? Would you classify this as an animal, as a cryptid, or something else? And so whereas a skunk ape or even Pinky, Mossman, things like that, you can kind of hold on to it and say it seems to be distinct. Look at something like a Wendigo, right? Would a Wendigo be considered a cryptid? A skinwalker, would a skinwalker be considered a cryptid? And this is where I want responses from you guys. I'd love to know your opinions as I talk about these next 3 stories, which I hope Josh is going to give me a little bit more time to get through them all. I'm long-winded. These 3 Florida stories, and whether or not you would classify these as cryptids, as humans, like morphed, as fairies or jinn or something along those lines. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the Coyote Woman. This is one of my favorite stories, and it seems to be one that gets people's attention. This takes place in Rosewood, Florida in Lake County. There was this young girl who fell in love with a man, and her parents did not approve of these 2 falling in love at all. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that she was in her early teens and he was 17, almost a man. But it seemed to have more to do with the fact that she was white and he was black. And the parents refused to allow them to see each other. Instead, they would sneak out at night and they would meet in this cemetery in the Ocala National Forest, which was nearby to Rosewood, Florida. And they would kiss, right? They would talk to each other. They would basically, their dating involved being in a cemetery. I've done that before. It's kind of creepy, but it still works. The parents found out. The dad absolutely flipped out. He was going to ship her away. The mom had to convince him to allow the daughter to stay, but she had to promise never to see him again. And they locked her in her room a lot. And so, but it was gnawing at the dad, right? It was absolutely gnawing at the dad. And so he went out one day. He's in the town square and he sees the guy. And so he goes up to him and he starts beating him. He beats him basically within an inch of his life. And the weird thing about it is that no one helped, right? The white people who were in the area were actually formed a circle and cheered him on. The African Americans in the area, they were too nervous to help. They just kind of were backing off and pretending it wasn't happened. He drags him off into the woods. The guy is never seen again. Some people say he killed him and buried him in the forest. Other people say that the guy just, smartened up and left because it was a little bit later, she goes into the center of town and she literally sees the blood of the man she loves on the ground. And she's like, what is this? I can't, and no one will kind of meet her eyes. And she's like, what is this? And someone finally tells her the story and she's yelling at the townspeople. Why did no one help him? Aren't we better than this? And they were just ignoring her. Some were actually even laughing at her. And so she's completely filled with rage. She goes home. She goes into her father's bedroom, takes out his pistol, and when he comes home a little bit later, she calls out the name of the man she loves, and she shoots her father 3 times. Now she's like freaked out. She's going to get arrested. What's going to happen to her? Her mom's going to come home, and so she goes to the only place where she feels safe, which is this cemetery. She lies down on the ground in the cemetery and she's just crying. She starts to just bawl her eyes out. As she's doing this, she starts to hear this coyote howl. And she kind of looks up and she sees that there are now a whole bunch of coyotes. There's a pack of coyotes and they're circling the cemetery. And she starts crying even harder. And they're circling and they're howling even louder. And she starts to scream, like the kind of scream that can only come from, young love and guilt from this murder. And she's like screaming, crying, screaming, wailing. And the coyotes are howling and howling and howling. And the two noises seem to like mix into each other. And then she takes the gun and she kills herself. But she doesn't die. She immediately transforms into this half coyote, half woman. And as the transformation kind of becomes complete and she becomes more animal than woman, she jumps from the cemetery into the pack and they all take off. And to this day, in that area, it's said that she still walks and stalks the Ocala National Forest near Rosewood, Florida, in Lake County. She still is in the woods there looking to take revenge on anyone who does bad. And that at night, you can actually hear this very distinct, in that part of the forest, you can hear this very distinct howl, which sounds like a coyote, but has like almost a scream underneath it. Now, the reason why I got this story is someone contacted me that him and his friends, when they were younger, he was told this story all the time. He'd be walking down this road on the way to Alexander Springs. He was told this story by his grandfather. It was already an old story by then. Him and his friends used to go into the cemetery at night, and the legend trip or the dare was you would lie down on one of the graves, cross your arms like this, and you would close your eyes. And when you did that, you would start to hear the coyote woman howling and stalking and running a circle around the cemetery. And the last person to be in the cemetery is the guy who won. He was like the manliest one because everyone else would freak out. And the challenge was to be the one who stayed. The weird thing is that there are so many parts of this story that don't make sense. The first of which being There is no such town as Rosewood, Florida in Lake County, right? So if you're thinking Rosewood, which doesn't exist, there are tons of things named Rosewood, but it's not. It's actually Paisley, Florida. There has never been a Rosewood, Florida in Lake County. It's actually Paisley, Florida, on the road between Paisley. I'm sorry, I said Alexander Springs. It's actually Lake Dorr. It's called Maple Grove Cemetery. It's one of those famous disappearing cemeteries in the Ocala. It's more popularly known as Shockley Cemetery. I actually did a presentation in DeLand, and people are like, "Oh yeah, the Shockleys are famous in this area." So it was actually called Shockley, Florida, years ago. There is a Rosewood, Florida, and it's in a different county. It's in, I think, Putnam County. I could be wrong about that. Where there was racial tension. It's the site of the Rosewood Massacre, where in 1932, I always get the date wrong on that. Yeah, 1923. It was basically, I like to think of it or communicate it as To Kill a Mockingbird, but with actual violence occurring, where this African American man had assaulted a woman, and so they kind of picked him up, they brought him back for trial, and then the people wanted to lynch him. The sheriff actually kind of stayed off that, and so but the people were so riled up, they went back to Rosewood to get another criminal, and Rosewood had kind of prepped itself. And firing started, and over 100 people are said to possibly have died. They don't have an exact number, but the town of Rosewood was burned. So we do have a place called Rosewood that might have adopted it. The other thing is coyotes have only been in Florida since the 1970s. So how can this story be generationally old? I know I'm old. I was born in the 1970s, but this dude's grandfather predates me by at least 2 generations. And yet they still heard that coyote. The people are still reported seeing this beautiful woman by day walking in those woods. They still challenged each other, and then were kind of met by something they couldn't explain. So I ask you guys, the coyote woman, is she a cryptid? Is she a ghost? Is it a ghost story? Is it a cryptid story? Is it now unlike the fae or the fairies, this was once a human, right? So how exactly do you qualify that? How exactly do you, if you had to put it in a category, where would you put it? Welcome to Florida, right? Not even our cryptids are easily explained. But I would love to have your guys' feedback on that. While you listen to the next story, which is a lot like the Pukwudgies, and that would be the story of the mini lights. I'm not sure how many of you guys have ever heard this story, but it is one of the most engaging stories in all of, I like Johnny, cynical. It's 100% folklore. It doesn't happen at all, right? The mini lights are probably the most complex, well-known in the community pieces of tale, folklore, whether you want to call it folklore, whether you want to call it monster sightings that I've ever heard. And I've been doing this since 1994. There have been, other than something like Bloody Mary, which we can all agree probably isn't real, and it's just passed on and transforms the way we need it. This story has so many different variations of it because the people of St. Pete, where this takes place, need it. This story has also been called the story of Minnie's lights, the midget lights, the mystery lights, Minnie's lightning, the midget lightning. I mean, it's got all of these different names that people have talked about or said throughout the generations of this. Also called the Mennonites, which is kind of part to the story. So the basic story goes like this. There was a woman living on the shores of St. Pete off Booker Creek, like on Booker Creek. And she's reported as either being a witch in some of the stories, or in other stories, a Mennonite, which is why it's sometimes called the Mennonites. And she had this shack. Now, people said that protecting this shack, she had these 2 shortish ogres that were bald. They were often reported as being bluish green. Sometimes they were straight green. Sometimes they were reported as being like pale, like almost like this white glowing thing. Sometimes their skin was painted. It had like different, it almost seemed like tattoos. They had glowing eyes. Sometimes they had clubs or weapons in their hands. A lot of times they're reported as having lanterns. And the story goes that people would give this woman trouble because she was either a witch or a Mennonite. Another version of the story says they wanted to build where her shack was, and so people were constantly tormenting her. And when they did, she would release these two monsters who would chase the people away. Sometimes they would catch them and beat them. Other times they would just completely scare them away. But there were these two almost twin ogres, mini ogres, who would just could be unleashed, right? And this has been reported for years in that area. The shack itself was eventually burned down. Minnie, her name was often said to be Minnie. Minnie was driven out of the area, but for some reason these ogres are still there. And so in St. Pete on Booker Creek, it said that if you go there and you say mini lights, come out tonight 3 times, that these two ogres will come out and chase you. Other people have reported that when you say it, all of a sudden you start to feel this pull on you. People have reported, and I'm talking modern cases of people saying that they've seen these ogres in that area. That these hands kind of rip out of the ground and grab you. Other times they're reported, this is me giving my son the don't talk. He just got home from work. He found a new job. That they're just ghost lights now, that these kind of these will-o'-the-wisps or these ghost lights follow you around as well. There are 3 kind of major places where they're located at. One is called Thrill Hill, and it's probably the least likely of them. The other one was Child's Park. And in Child's Park, they said that they were able to, they used underground tunnel systems. So they used the sewers and things like that. And so these ogres would kind of pop up in different areas very quickly. And it said they used the sewers that kind of emptied out at Child's Park. And then probably the most popular location for them would be Rosier Park. And Rosier Park had the most number of sightings, probably because it's also the largest area. This story is primarily the story of an African-American community. The mini lights are kind of St. Pete's version of the boogeyman. This story is spread primarily from African Americans to their children. Don't go out or the mini lights are going to get you. If you stay out after dark, the mini lights are going to come grab you. When I went to Rosier Park, Child's Park, when I went to Child's Park, it's very easy to see how those tunnels are right there, right? Something creepy could be in those tunnels. Alligators, when we went there, alligators were in those tunnels. Thrill Hill is kind of the same way. There's a lot of these little areas, but it's really the story of a community getting smaller and smaller, right? So you have Tropicana Fields kind of been built. It's kind of crushed, like made the area smaller. Gentrification is the word you use. But this is still spread. People still talk about the fact that the mini lights are out there stalking. African Americans in the area are still known to go to those locations and say those faithful words 3 times. Depending on what neighborhood you were in, you claimed the mini lights. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's why they're in these different locations. That's why they're in these 3 different locations, because your neighborhood told your version of the story. Another neighborhood told another version of the story. And it became these monsters that you were scared to stay out after dark. And you have people from multiple generations talking in newspapers very bluntly. There's Facebook groups that are associated with it, of people just recounting their mom telling them. It reminds me a lot. I have a lot of Hispanic students. It reminds me a lot of La Llorona, right? This idea that if you are bad, she's going to come get you. If you guys don't know her, she's the weeping woman. She's the woman who killed her children in water and now is looking to kill other children as well. I have Hispanics who are so scarred by this that they think La Llorona is real, right? That if they do things wrong, their grandmother has told them very clearly that this woman is going to come get them. And it's the same for the mini lights. And I like the fact that we have like like Deborah said, it sounds like a grain of truth to the story mixed with folklore, because there are two very real cases that might actually happen to feed into this fear. People see them, right? People have reported them. People have reported them for years. Maybe it's, once again, misidentification, but there was a very legitimate reason why people were scared of being in the neighborhood. If you look at the picture that is on the right, where it says St. Pete Alligator Farms, this is a legitimate picture. I didn't draw either of these pictures. This was an advertisement for St. Pete's Alligator Park. And if you notice, those are two small African-American children with the alligators. And it said that this St. Pete's Alligator Park was notorious for taking kids and putting them to work in the alligator farms. Now, some of the most vicious reports said they actually fed them to it, fed the small children to the alligators. Other reports said that the kids were responsible for feeding the alligators, and if they got caught up in the mix, it wasn't really a big deal. This is a legitimate advertisement for a business that used to exist. They used to run through the neighborhood of St. Pete and take kids. Like, that was a very real thing. The next thing, the picture on the left, that is Eco and Echo. Eco and Echo lived in Virginia, and when they were children, they were kidnapped by traveling carnival recruiters. They were noticed working in the fields. This is in 1899 when they were originally taken. They were kidnapped and brought into the carnival, the circus. They were billed as anything from aliens to savages to people from deep within the darkness of the Amazon to being from another planet. And they spent years as a sideshow attraction, right? And that fits in because some of the people have said that the Mini-Lights are actually, that Minnie had recruited people who were like deformed members of the circus to protect her, and that's what they were. These are real people, though. These albinos were brought around. They never were paid. They were often kept in cages until one night their mother went to the circus. By this time, they had been sold a ringling, by the way. She went to the circus, and she's like, those are my sons. And she actually had to fight to get custody of her own children and get them out of that environment. Now, Eco and Echo, who were really named George and Willie Muse, they by that time were somewhat famous, especially once the story came out. And so they actually sued Ringling to get back pay. By the way, they went to Orlando to settle that court case, and then they won. They ended up winning because they had to win to call themselves Eco and Echo and get back pay. But that's about the time where one version of the Mini-Light story takes place. And I talked to a sociologist, and I'm like, would people in St. Pete have heard that story? Was it popular enough? Was it? And he's like, yeah, that was something that was spread all throughout, on the East Coast in the mid to lower South of don't be like Eco and Echo. If you stay out past dark, the carnival people will come and they will kidnap you and they will take you and you'll never see your mom and dad again. So Eco and Echo might be another really good reason. But again, what do we have here? We do have a backstory. We do have something that makes sense. And yet people still see these monsters. Are those monsters cryptids? Are they don't sound like they're fairies. They don't sound like they're the little folk or anything like that. So we're left with this gray area of what these people can be. I'm hoping Josh doesn't cut me off because I've got one more story for you that I'm going to do. I'll do quickly for you, but if you want to hear the whole version of the story, you can totally get my book because it's in my book. And that would be the story of the Stikini. The Stikini, and you can see two different pictures of it. The one on the smaller of the two is one that was online that I kind of manipulated a little bit. The one that's on the left, the bigger one, was actually made by a woman named Della Daughtry, who I work with sometimes. And she actually has done the artwork for that you've seen throughout some of the presentations, the drawings. She's done some of those drawings as well. The Stikini are seminal, witch, owl vampires. And the story goes that there was a seminal woman, and these seminal, there was more than one, but they were cheated on by their husbands. And so they approached this goddess, this known as She Who Walks the Circle. And She Who Walks the Circle granted them the power to get revenge on the men who had done them wrong. To me, I'm a big, huge Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Sounds like vengeance demons, right? They were given temporary power to get revenge on these men who had done them wrong. And once they got their revenge, they were like, well, you know what? Like that person over there, when I was younger, they did. And so they used that power. They didn't give the power back. They used that power to get revenge on someone else. And then it was like, well, you know what? My friend said that her husband had, and so they kept using their power and using their power. And with every spell that they did, with every action that they did with this power, they lost a little bit more of their humanity. It's very much like the Wendigo or the Wendigo, however you choose to pronounce it, that they would constantly lose their humanity until all of their humanity was pretty much washed away, and they became these vampire owls who now stalk the woods between Tampa and Ocala, right? And some of the areas around there. They stalk the woods looking for men to seek vengeance on. And by vengeance, I just mean men who are alone in the woods may become victims of these vicious attacks where they drink their blood. They're known to disembowel them and to cook their insides in a nice soup, which is good on these cold Florida nights. And so these are these women. Probably the most famous thing that they're known for is they were the ones who were behind the Dade Massacre. If you don't know, the Dade Massacre was essentially the trigger for the Second Seminole War, where troops were going from Fort Brooks near Tampa to reinforce Fort King near Ocala. And as they reached what is now present-day Bushnell, they were ambushed by the Seminoles who were lying in wait in the trees in the swamp. And the Seminoles were able to basically wipe out all 111 soldiers who left, right, who were part of this troop, this platoon that were going up there, except for two people survived. A guy by the name of Ransom Clark, who's probably the more famous of the two, and another guy named James Sprague. But the weird thing is that the Seminoles say that the Seminole lore says that story never actually happened, that it was actually the Stikini who stalked those men over the course of night. So they started walking. They noticed that their path was, kind of disrupted. Bridges were down, things like that. The first night, 5 men mysteriously disappeared. The next day, the men started seeing these beautiful women in the woods, and they figured like they were just being tracked, except for that night, they lost 5 more people, just disappeared. And then the next day, the women seemed to be closer, but now the men are kind of drawn to them, much like the sirens, right? Or you saw even like the harpies, right? Drawn in because they're beautiful by day, but they're vicious by night. And then the next night, 10 people are missing. And the next day, all of a sudden, people start walking off the path and never being seen again. One guy who was completely freaked out was James Sprague, who decided he was going to allow himself to fall back, right? And when dark fell, he decided he was going to completely leave. He was going to go AWOL. It wasn't worth it. And as he's stomping through the woods, trying to find a different path and trying to get away, he came upon a coven of these 3 Stikinis, and he could see them, and they were stirring it, and they're stirring that soup. And he looked all around, and he could see the bodies of his friends. He could see the faces of people he knew, but they were dead, and their insides were being cooked. And they looked completely pale by the moonlight and all this stuff like that. Over the course of the next few days, the Stikini wiped all of those people out. So it sounds like it might just be folklore, and yet the number of reports I've gotten from the Ocala of people who stall out, or they lose power in their car, or they're in a tent, and they are surrounded by this screeching of owls and a very aggressive attack on their tent or their car. People have actually have scratches on their car that look like an owl, like a gigantic owl has scratched them, has like damaged the car. Again, part folklore, but these beasts, which is why I figure that they're cryptids, which is why I put them in there. These cryptids, these monsters are still being seen. Now, whether it's something else, whether it's vicious owls, whether it's Mossman, whether it's Skunk Ape getting some kind of weird attack and being misidentified, these things are still in the woods. They're still being reported. And they're still really confusing. And I think that's one of the things that keeps the interest in cryptids alive, is that the evidence is there, the experiences are there, we just don't know what they are, and we don't know in what neat category to put it in. And so the stories continue to grow almost legendary status. And it's still going on. Does anybody have any questions or any story that they want to share or anything like that? Do we have any dogman or wolfman sightings in Florida? Yeah, like there are a lot of like little like one-time cases that happen. I haven't heard of necessarily any wolfman ones, but I know that like over the last 2 years, there's been an upsurge of dogman sightings in the Ocala, in the Panhandle, some on the West Coast, like near Jacksonville, like between Jacksonville and Ormond Beach. It's really hard to tell what they might be because, once again, these are also the same areas that have reported everything else. And much like things in the ghost world, things in the cryptid world cycle through, right? And so maybe 5-6 years ago, lizard men were huge. So everything was being identified as a lizard man and stuff like that. Dogmen, because there are so many sightings in the Chicago area right now, and in different areas of New England and in the Midwest, and a ridiculous amount in the Chicago, Illinois area, they're a popular topic, right? So just like now, like everything is a demon, everything is in the ghost world, or shadow men, stuff like that. It's hard to tell whether these dogmen are animals that are being misidentified or other cryptids that are now being called dogman. I will tell you, though, I have not heard a single chupacabra report in Florida, which is a shame because I would have loved to have been able to include a whole section on chupacabras tonight. Anyone else have anything they want to ask? I appreciate anyone who stayed for the entire thing. Multiple skunk apes seen at once or just alone? Great question. The majority of skunk ape, Bigfoot sometimes are reported multiple, right? And even generational, like sometimes big ones with little ones. So you think there's almost a family. There have been Bigfoot that have been reported that seem feminine. This is not necessarily true in Florida. From what I understand, the report that I got in Kerr City of the ones that got annoyed, the ones in Kerr City that were throwing the rocks at the church or at the hotel, that's the only report I know of multiple Bigfoot or multiple skunk apes in one location at a time. So usually most of the time it's just one. There are some really great Bigfoot researchers and skunk ape researchers that are out there. So if you guys are really interested in a lot of these details, you can go to their websites. You can contact me and I can give you some of the ones that I trust more than others. But from what I've heard, most of them are single solitary ones. Are these photos Florida cryptids? So the ones that are here, the ones that are here, the one that you're talking about specifically, the tree rabbit, is actually something called a polka, which is a Scottish cryptid, and it's kind of this half or part horse, part rabbit, who they feel is kind of like a leprechaun of this Scottish area of these certain towns. It is not a Florida one, but it reminded me of the jackalope. which there have been these kind of monstrous jackalope reports in the Keys area, in the wood area, like the Everglades, kind of more down towards the Keys, like it's not the upper Everglades. And so I included that. The picture of the redheaded woman is actually a version of the story of the woman of Shiloh, but it just looked really cool. It was visual. Yes, there are several different places in Florida that have the small little one is a changeling, that have changeling stories attached to them. And of course, I had to include the creature from the Black Lagoon, because the creature from the Black Lagoon was shot in Silver Springs. So while the creature from the Black Lagoon and mermen have been reported on the coastal areas of Florida, I included that picture because I love me some Silver Springs, and which is the most haunted place in Florida probably. And I included that because, you know, it's Silver Springs. And so it's a little, even though it's not real, it's a Florida cryptid. The man on the bottom left. Nope. The man on the bottom left is a version that was drawn of the Witch of Arbuckle Creek, which is another story I covered. Once again, it was just like I needed one more picture, and I wanted to include one of my own pictures, and so I included that in there, and it looked really creepy. So these are that. Gotta keep in mind, I'm a ghost guy, not a cryptid guy. So I'm like, let me get some ghosts in there.
Absolutely, and we have hosted events with Christopher before. If you're interested, we have one with haunted Native American ghost stories. We have campfire tales, and we've also had an event on Florida's haunted love stories. So if you're
Curses,
interested in
we did one on crimes and curses. That one was good.
Yeah,
those were good.
Oh yeah. Oh man, there's been quite a few on, so you can check those out on the OCLS YouTube, as well as checking out Christopher's Facebook is probably the best place, at least from what I've seen, to check out your information. I know that's where you post like all of your podcast episodes anytime you're coming up with a new book, or if you just found something new and it's even before the podcast. I've seen some of the stuff come out there as well when it gets really exciting. So I'm gonna post a link to the survey.
We call it the dump. Facebook is where everything ends up, and it's actually more usable and accessible than a website these days, right? So it's facebook.com/tripping on legends. Really easy to remember.
Yeah, and please just go ahead and check that out. I just posted the link there. Christopher, thank you so much again for joining us tonight. Thanks for going a little bit long. It was good.
Thank you for allowing me.
We were all interested, and actually, people were coming in even more towards the end. So thanks so much for coming in, and it was really great stories. I'm excited to.
Thank you everyone for coming. If you follow Tripping on Legends, go to Facebook, follow Tripping on Legends, or even Instagram. It's at Spooky Tripping, and you direct message me. I can get you out a book this week. I can give you a discount and you get a signed copy. Just direct message me after you followed me on any of those things, and I will get your book out in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
And you could be the first one of your friends to have it.
There you go. I still got mine. And definitely was reading at the Haunted Ocala as well, and just some awesome stuff. You really come up with some really cool stories from around the whole state. And you know, we all know Florida's kind of weird, but you really find even weirder stuff than I even know. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. And I'm sorry about anyone having nightmares about Salem Flop, but my terror is now your terror, because it still freaks me out.
We all suffer with it. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And hope you all have a fantastic night. Have a good one.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to find out when we have new fun and informative videos for you. Orange County Library System is your place to learn, grow, connect.
Hey, there's an egg roll over there and crab rangoons.
Oh, man.
The rice is in the rice cooker.
Okay.
All right, you look great.
I want an egg roll.
Yeah, I know. What the hell?
No, my daughter ate the egg roll, man. I got enough to give me an extra one, and my daughter ate it during dinner tonight. What's up with that?
Egg rolls are. I think it was one of those foods that I don't know if there's like an upper limit on how many I could eat. It's like one of those things that just is like they have like all the texture that you need to like make it so you could dunk sauce on them, you can eat them plain.
And the ones you get this is like a tragedy. People are talking about gas prices.
Oh, cool.
The one that's
Funny.
the ones that you
That's
get
awesome.
at Publix, or not Publix, but Walmart, and you get like the little package of 5 of them. They went from $2.50 to $4.
My God.
Like that has put a serious economic strain on me with the amount of get that I get.
Going through the egg roll.
Exactly.
Those are pretty cool, Sarah. I like it. She's been doing some resin, inspired resin.
Oh, very cool.
I don't know if
Very
you saw
cool.
them when she was showing them off, but they're pretty cool.
Yeah. No, that's yours. All right. Well, cool, man. I gotta get
Yeah.
going. My
Thanks.
son's
Yeah.
and everything.
Enjoy your night. Have a good dinner.
Thank you very much again. It seems like there was some good responses and stuff in the chat, so people seem to like it. So good.